We recently posted a short on Social Security, and a lot of people were not happy with what we had to say. So, in this video, we're going to talk through some of the questions that came up. What does it mean as far as Social Security running out? When is it set to run out? What are some things you can do if it does or does not run out? And how does this show up for our clients when we have conversations around Social Security? So, stay tuned. Let's dive in. Recently we had a short that we posted, and we are talking about Social Security and that Social Security will be there. Was what we said in so many different ways. And so there's some questions that we're going to ask that'll kind of hit on how we feel, why we feel how we do,
Yep.
and just give some more context and clarity around Social Security, because as we mentioned in the previous video, it is a big deal for most, if not all. And there is a lot about Social Security that people don't understand. So we'll answer some questions here. The first thing we want to talk through, and I think this defines in a way the difference in understanding Social Security and the future of it, in my opinion. The question that we'll talk through and that I'll ask is, because we've seen a lot of literature saying that Social Security is set to run out. What does it mean when they say Social Security is going to run out?
So Social Security has a trust. It is the OASI, which means Old Age and Survivors Insurance Trust. And it is a large savings account that has a bunch of reserves in it used to pay out Social Security benefits. So currently, there's money that gets paid into the trust from payroll taxes. And then there's money that gets paid out of the trust for benefits. And the money that's going in does not match the money coming out. And so to make up that gap, we take from our savings in the trust. So when they say it's set to run out, what they're saying is at the rate at which we're paying into it and getting paid out of it, we are going to run out of reserves soon, right? And that's been known the whole time, the entire time since the last time it ran out in 1983. They've been saying we're going to have to make changes in the future to make sure that this stays viable. But the question of what does it mean when Social Security trust runs out means that the savings part of the trust will be depleted, and we will only be relying on the income to pay out the expenses.
And I think when people hear that Social Security is set to run out, and I think they hear this because I hear it, and I think this is how they say it, if it's not
Yeah.
explained very well, is that Social Security will be over. And I
Yeah.
think that is a misconception, or the misconception currently, because a lot of places you'll see and a lot of things you'll read, and it'll, from a lot of different sources, will explain and talk through the trust is running out. It doesn't say that benefits will end, but just the Social Security trust will run out. When are they saying that it's going to run out?
Yeah. And so they keep recalculating it every year. And as of 2024, the last calculation is that it will run out in 2033. Previously, it was 2037. So it's been coming down each year. So that's scary. And every time they put out a new report with a new number, the news picks it up and says, hey, it's going to run out. I think you're absolutely accurate. The best clickbait is it's going to run out. It's fear inducing. When they say run out, though, it doesn't mean that your Social Security check will just stop showing up, right? So it's set to run out in 2033 currently, if there are no changes to current policy, current funding, from Congress or from the administration. So 2033.
And so when 2033 rolls around, and I mean, it is at this rate, 2033 may turn into 2032, may turn into, right? Which I also contributes to the concern of that it'll run out, right?
It moves closer and closer each year,
closer
right?
and closer. And so I can't rely on that, right? Which makes sense. It makes a ton of sense. But let's say 2033, Social Security runs out, meaning the Social Security trust is empty, and there's nothing else, no other changes, policy related, that take place. What will that mean? What will it look like when the Social Security trust runs out in 2033?
The rules of the OASI trust say that you cannot borrow to fill the trust. So we cannot pay Social Security benefits out on borrowed money. So that means that when the Social Security savings account is depleted, we will have to rely only on the income coming in from payroll taxes from working Americans to pay Social Security benefits to retired Americans. And so when that happens, at the current calculations, they would have to drop benefits down by around 25%. Some people say 22, some people say up to 27, depends on who you talk to. And they don't know, right? It's an estimation 9-10 years away, but they're saying about 25% reduction in benefits. So that means that if you are retired receiving $2,000 a month in Social Security payouts, that your existing payout would go down to $1,500 a month. That's a big deal. A 25% reduction is a lot of money. That also means that if your Social Security statement says you're going to be receiving $2,000, that they would have to update it to now you're going to receive $1,500. So it would, in its current status with no changes, it would affect currently retired, about to retire, and 20, 30, 40-year-olds who are paying into it as well. What the stats say is that if that reduction happens down to 75% of your payout, that it could then last at that level for 75 years. So that's where, when we talk to folks that say, I'm 35 years old, is Social Security even going to be around when I retire in 20 years, 30 years, right? Valid question. Completely understand the concern, completely understand the anxiety, because it's anxiety inducing. But with that change, the government does nothing, Congress does nothing, and the benefits come down 25%. You could be paid 75% of your benefit out currently for 75 years. And most of us will be gone in 75 years. So for that reason is the confidence that I say it's going to be around in some capacity. It might be a reduced amount. There's some other options that they have to make changes on it, but it will be around and it will be a part of the retirement planning that we do.
Thinking about some of the changes that they could do, this is not the first time that Social Security was in danger.
Correct.
What were some of the changes that took place last time that Social Security was in jeopardy?
Yeah, the most recent time was 1983. The trust was getting more and more depleted. The calculations were not coming out even like now, right? We were getting less paid in than being paid out. And so people know the reason that it is not coming out like they calculated is because people are living longer. So you're paying your Social Security out instead of dying at age 70. People are dying at age 75, 80, 85, 90. so they continue to have to pay out their pension proceeds longer. And just like everyone else's pension, right? Just like we've seen companies abandon the pension, this is the reason, right? The math stops mathing when you live till 100 years old. So it's not from mismanagement. I think it's important to know that they're not mismanaging your money. Grandma just ain't dying like she used to. But the second part is, what did they do last time? So in 1983, they had known for a while that it was unsustainable. They came back together and they made a few changes. The biggest three changes were, first, they moved the full retirement age from age 65 to age 67. It was gradual. It wasn't overnight. It was month by month for 25 years. But eventually, the full retirement age became 67 and not 65, which meant that they were saving money on the payouts and how early they would start paying. The second thing they did was they increased payroll taxes. So payroll taxes in the Social Security used to be 6.13%. That law changed it to 6.2%. So not a significant amount. And they did that over time as well. So if you went from paying 6.13 to 6.15, you probably didn't feel it. But collectively, for all the Americans, it really helped. And then the last thing they did, which I'm not a big fan of, is they started to tax your Social Security benefit. The reason I'm not a big fan of that is because you pay federal and state income taxes out of your check, and then you pay in the Social Security. So the money that's in the Social Security trust has already been taxed. And with this new law change in 83, they started taxing it when you pull it out as well. Now, there are different thresholds for how much of it's taxed. Some people don't have any of it taxed. Some people have 50% of it taxed. Some people have 85% taxed. But either way, all of it has already been taxed by the federal government before we put it in. Now they're taxing it again when it comes out. So don't love that. But with those changes and some other ones about who's involved and who's not involved, they ran a surplus for a while. So instead of the benefits going in and the benefits being paid out being a deficit, there was a surplus. And that surplus grew through the rest of the 80s and the 90s to a really, really high amount, to the point that some administrations started borrowing. It's called borrowing when you pay it back. Started taking from the Social Security Trust. So won't get political there, but those changes went from a deficit to a surplus. So that takes us to this time, right? There are options to fill the fund. You can push retirement age back again. People don't love that, but they didn't love it the first time either, but it worked. You can increase payroll taxes, right? There's some folks that say increasing it 2 to 4%, your portion and the employer portion solves it completely. So you can increase payroll taxes. You can also reduce benefits, right? You can say instead of 100% payout, it's going down to 90% payout, 85% payout, or a mix of the three. Or you could take money that's in other places in the federal budget and put it in the trust and fill your savings account, right? So there are a lot of different options for how to solve the problem of a depleting OASI, Social Security Trust. All of them require congressional action. And so we sit in a political stalemate for now. And I won't speculate on what will happen or what should or could happen, but we do want to know that some of the worst case scenarios, it will exist. It just will exist in a diminished capacity. And when we say diminished, we're looking at about 25% reduction. So we take that into account a lot when we do our planning as well.
What are some of the ways that shows up for our clients when we talk through their plans, when we try to build out what it'll look like in the future?
Yeah. The first thing is diversification of income, right? You hear diversification a lot around investments, but when we're doing income planning, retirement income planning specifically, we want to make sure that we are spreading out where the income can come from so that we're not more reliant in one place or one type of account than we need to be. So that's the first thing. We are not putting all of our eggs in the Social Security income basket. And we want to make sure the investment accounts or any other pensions that we have or any other real estate or home equity or cash, all those things have different risk levels to them, but they also have different risk factors on whether it's taxes going up, congressional action, investment return. We really want to spread out, being diversified from our income sources. The second thing is Social Security optimization. If we know that there's a possibility of a reduction of benefits, then we need to put that in. And we also need to plan accordingly, specifically if we have someone who has longevity in their family and their mom, parents, brothers, sisters, aunts, uncles live pretty long, then we want to make sure that we're optimizing their plan for more money later in life, which can mean that we're waiting longer. The other side of that is when we have a couple, right? The barbell approach where we can turn one on early and have one of them wait longer, because we know that when one of them passes away, the other one takes their benefits. So we can really spread those things out and optimize the Social Security decisions that we make, knowing that there are some apprehensions and anxiety about the funding of it. Then we talk about taxes in the state, right? We understand that our different places where our taxes come from are different. Social Security is taxed. There are thresholds in which our Social Security payout, like I said, will either be taxed at 0, 50, or 85%. So we need to understand that our Social Security decisions impact our taxes. We also know, we talk about Roth dollars and Roth IRAs, that when we're pulling money from Roth places, they're not technically income because we've paid income on them. So it can reduce our taxable income, which means it can reduce the tax threshold of our Social Security. It can also reduce our Medicare premiums. It can also reduce a lot of other things that get factored into our overall tax burden long term. Required minimum distribution is a big one as well, that we would have less RMDs or required minimum distribution to make out of an account if it's Roth, because we've already made it. So those are some of the ways that we really factor that in. One of the biggest ones, though, is we take all of those things into account when we do a stress test. So when we talk about stress tests, we all know that when we build a plan or we do any type of financial projections, it's kind of a linear idea, right? 8% return, 25% tax rate, healthcare, all of these things are kind of baked in a linear fashion, but life's not linear. And so one of the things we do is we run it through a stress test. And I do want to show this stress test because I think it's helpful for people to understand, if they're having us build a plan for them, are you taking caution or risk into account when you're giving me these recommendations? And so we're looking at this stress test here on this proposed plan. And what you'll see is we might have a baseline 98% success, which means that we don't run out of money. But what happens if the market drops or taxes go up or different things? And so what you're looking at is what happens in some of these bad scenarios. How does the plan perform? And we're looking at an equity drop of 20%, right? We can knock that up to 30% and see what it does, but we've got it at 20 now. So that means right at retirement, you come out the gate and all of a sudden it drops 30%, right? What does that do? We can look at, what if Social Security is reduced? Social Security being reduced by 30%, right? We already talked about the fact that Social Security right now, we're expecting a 25% reduction if Congress does nothing. So 30% is a really conservative estimate for us to say, does your plan still work? You'll see this plan still works at a 92.9% success rate in that case. And some of the other things we're taking into account, what if inflation's higher than the 3% we model? 5% inflation for the rest of your life. What would that do? asset rate of return 2% lower than we expect. If we're expecting 8% and your assets do 6, what does that do? Right? Tax expenses 30% higher. What would happen if Congress comes out and says we need to fill all this thing, and the reason we're going to fill it, the way we're going to fill it, is we're going to tax people 30% more? Will your plan perform? Living longer is a risk, and then healthcare costs. We've estimated them in here based on national averages and growth rates. But what if they're 30% higher than we expect? What does that do? And so you can see that the plan in some of these cases really does a good job, even in the scenarios of really high stress tests. One of the ones we're looking at is inflation, right? If inflation's 5% for the rest of retirement, we need to mitigate against that. And so when we think about how we use Social Security insecurity and plan for that, all of our plans take all of these things into account before we make a recommendation to a client about whether they can retire, how much they can spend, when they should pull Social Security, and what would happen if things go wrong. This is us running the scenarios of if things go wrong. Yeah.
Being able to test all of these different areas, specifically because this is what we're talking about, Social Security, it's baked into the plans. We already know that there's a probability that Social Security may decrease by 25%, right? When that'll happen, we don't know as of today, right? We got about 9 or 10 years, 8 or 9 years, but it could be sooner. And so being able to understand, hey, we factor that in, and this is still what the probability of you running out of money or you having money at end of life looks like. So
yeah, I think it's really important for people to understand that if we do our jobs well, we assume that we don't know. A lot of people are looking for certainty, coming to us for certainty, and whether it's investment certainty or financial certainty in the future. And I think one of the best things we do is to say, we have no idea what's going to happen in the future. We don't know how your stock portfolio is going to perform. We don't know how inflation is going to go. We don't know how taxes are going to go. We don't know how long you're going to live. There are so many risks out there, but we can put a plan in place that has a very high probability of success. And then we can monitor it on an ongoing basis and make adjustments along the way. And so if you're finding advisors who act like they know what's going to happen, I would be very afraid to work with those folks, because what if they're wrong? We assume that we don't know, and we're just going to build a really solid plan that is all weather, right? No matter what the season is, we can go through that season. And then we're already prepared with guardrails. We talked about guardrails in a previous one. We're already prepared with the upper and lower guardrails, the triggering events that if this happens, we need to make a change. We need to reduce income. We need to reduce expenses. We need to change our investment portfolio. We need to rethink about how we're going to go about things. And so if you can give me a really good high probability of success at the beginning, and then a track record of how we make adjustments along the way if things go unplanned, that's the best case scenario for a retirement plan. And that's what we do with clients.
I think it's important what you were saying also. We, with Social Security, right, we're assuming that they're going to make some changes before it runs out. Like that really is our assumption. But also an assumption is it's not going to last till 2033, right? Like that is an assumption that is baked into the plan. Assumptions go both ways. Yes, they're going to make some changes. Will they make them this year, next year? No. But at some point before 2033, something will change to where Social Security won't run out. We assume that because that's what they did before. They were able to replenish it, but also understanding that may not happen. And so if it gets to the point where they don't replenish it and Social Security goes down to 75%, or more. Like, we're just making decisions now and creating a plan based on the information we have now, with the understanding that things could be different, and being flexible, and guiding people through that, the uncertainty, right?
Yeah.
And so,
We're just as shocked as you are when things happen, right? You know, we're prepared for what could happen, hoping and praying for good things, right? Hoping that, you know, markets do well and people act right and governments are functional. But in the event those don't happen, you know, we've planned for that. And I think it's important for folks to understand, usually before they quit their job, usually before they decide what their retirement date will be in a concrete fashion, that we have a plan for what happens with your worst case scenarios of the biggest risks in retirement, which are some of the things we just looked at.
yeah. If you have any questions that we don't answer, feel free to drop them in the chat, and we'll be sure to answer those questions for you. So,
And if you enjoyed this video, check out our video with a real life scenario of a retirement plan that we created for the Anderson family.